Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch, and this is a continuation of the My Images with Core Data series. In this three-part continuation, we'll be adding the ability to share your favorite images with other users of your app by creating a unique file that you can share as an email attachment to anyone who has your app. When they receive the email and tap on the attachment, they'll be given the option of opening it using the app and have the image and information about the image added to their core data database and the image to their documents directory. I'm going to go slowly and build on the process so that you'll understand how you can do this with your own apps. In this first video, we'll be adding new attributes to our core data entity and create a Universal Type Identifier that you'll be able to use to identify the content of your application's file that we will create for sharing. We'll see how the receiving device will recognize files of that type and automatically open when receiving the new content. In the following two videos, we'll work on interpreting the file that is received so that it can decode it and add to the receiving device's core data and documents folder. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. As this is a follow-up to the first two videos of this series, it would be helpful if you had watched and followed along with those videos so that you have a clear understanding of how the application works and what we are building. If you've been following along, you can continue to build on that application that was completed after the second video. If not, you can download the project from the link in the description below. The link is for a zip file, so if you're using Chrome, make sure your security preferences are allowing the download of zipped files. I find that I never have an issue when using Safari to download zip files. I've also included a link to some resources that we'll be using in the three videos in this part, so make sure you download them as well from the link in the description. When you run the application, you can tap on the New Image button. Doing this, we'll use the new Photos UI and Image Picker to choose a photo from your photo album and add it to the app. It stores the image in the device's documents directory and adds an entry to the Core Data SQLite database for persistence. The Core Data entity currently has only two attributes, one for the name that we allow the user to enter, and a second unique ID property that is created by the application that's used to identify the image that is stored in the documents directory. Once stored, we give the user the ability to either edit or delete the image from the device. Our goal in this three-part section is to add more attributes to the core data and to share all of it and the image with anyone else who has the app installed. So first, let's add three more properties or attributes to our MyImage entity. So open the data model and then tap on the plus button on the attributes section to add new attributes. The first will be comment, and it'll be a string. The next will be date taken, which will be a date. And the third will be received from, which will be another string, and that'll be the name of the person who sends us an image. All five of these attributes or properties are going to be encoded as JSON and packaged up with the image to be sent to other users of our app. As many core data types are optional by default, we create unwrapped values in our MyImages plus extension file for those properties. So first, for the comment attribute, I'll create a computed property called CommentView, and it'll be a string, and we'll return the comment if it exists, or just an empty string. We're going to do exactly the same thing for the received from property, naming it received from view, which again is a string, and it will return the received from string if it's not optional, or an empty string if it is. We're going to handle the date taken a little differently. You may recall earlier that we created a print statement to print the location of the device's documents directory so that we could get quick access to it. I've been asked to show how we could do the same for the SQLite database that Core Data uses. To do that, we'll go to the initializer for the MyImages container. And after we initialize it, we'll use a guard statement to make sure that it actually exists. And we can do this by accessing the persistent container persistent store descriptions, the first one, and the URL path. Else, we can't proceed with this app, so let's produce a fatal error notifying you as the developer that something drastically has gone wrong. If it does exist, however, we can simply print the string core data, followed by a comma, and then the path. Now, since I'm specifically going to show that path printed is for core data location, let's go to where I print the documents directory in the app entry point, and I'll add a string before it so that we know that each of our printed statements correspond to a different URL. So for this one, we'll put documents directory first. And we'll see the effect of this in just a minute. In the meantime, our form is going to need to have more items on it, and we use a FormView model to manage the bound values. So let's open FormView model and add 3 more published properties. The first will be for our comment, which will be an empty string. Now we'll be using a date picker for our date, so we'll need to define a specific date, and it can't be optional. So if the user chooses not to add a date, as for our existing items are currently that, I'll need to show a date or at least assign a date to the date picker that will be able to identify nil type values. So for this, I'll use the date's static distant past property. And then the third will be for the received from, that will again be an empty string. Now if the user hasn't chosen a date, we'll be hiding the date picker field. So I can use a computed Boolean property that I'll call date hidden that will simply compare our date to the date distant past, and it will return true if they match and false if a date has been chosen. Next, in the second initializer, we need to, when we select an image for editing or deletion, be able to present those 3 new pieces of information. So we can assign the MyImages comment view to comment. To the date property, we can assign the MyImages date taken property if one was assigned, else we'll assign the date distant past. And then to the received from property, we'll assign the MyImages received from view computed property. Now we can update our ImageFormView. After the text field where we ask the image name, we'll create another text field for comment that is bound to the view model's comment property. I'm going to add a new argument here that was introduced in iOS 16 that will automatically expand the text field vertically if we add more content than what will fit on one line. So we can add the axis argument and specify vertical. To handle the display of the date picker, I'm going to first create an H stack. I'll start with a text view using the string date taken. Next, I'll add a spacer. Then I'll follow this by first determining if the date taken exists, and I can use the view model's date hidden value for that. If it is, I'll create a text view with the string no date. And then I'll follow that with a button with a label set date, and the action will be to set the view model's date to the current date and thus displaying the date picker because it's no longer going to be hidden. Else, we must have already set a date, so I'm going to create an H stack, and as the first item, I'll create that date picker. For the title key, I'll use an empty string. The selection will be bound to the view model's date publish property. And I'm going to limit the range of choices to be up to the current date only, meaning I can't choose a date in the future. And I'll only display the date and not the time components. I'll need to be able to clear the date, so I'm going to add another button with clear date as the label. And then the action will be to set the viewModels date property to the date distant past, which is going to, of course, trigger the date hidden property to be false and hide the date picker. Let's add some padding to the H-stack, and we'll set the button style to bordered. In the preview then, you'll see that by default there is no date. I can tap on the Set Date button, and the date picker appears. I can choose a date from there, and that's what's displayed. And that's what we use when we update our core data source. If I want to clear the date, I can tap on that button, and we're back to showing no date. Now, if the image was received from someone else, which is the whole purpose of this set of videos, I want to show who that person is, and that's the received from. So if not viewModel received from is empty, meaning we've actually received this video from someone else, we'll create a text view using a string, and I'm going to use markup with 2 asterisks surrounding the string received from, which will make it bold, and then use string interpolation to display the viewModels received from string. Next, when we update our image, we'll need to update those new values. First, we'll set the selected image's comment value to the viewModels comment. Then, the selected image's date taken property will be assigned the viewModels date. The user will never update the received from field though, because this will be done when it gets imported later on. If we're not updating, we must be creating a new image object. So before we save, we can add the comment and the date taken new image properties to the corresponding viewModels values. Now, as an improvement to our UI, before the navigation title, let's set the text field style on the V-stack to use the rounded border style, and that will apply now to both of the displayed text views. And then finally, I'm going to make the V-stack disabled if we have received this image from someone else, so you won't be able to edit any images or any information about that image if it was received from someone else. Now we're going to add a new button to the toolbar to enable sharing. If you watch my video on share links in iOS 16, you might think that we're going to use it. But unfortunately, no. We will need to do some pre-processing of data, so we'll need to use a button that will allow us to do this and initiate the share process. So first, surround the navigation bar trailing toolbar item right now with an H-stack. For the second item in the H-stack, add a button. Now you won't see this in the preview as it's only going to be displayed if we are updating an existing image, and the preview is assuming a new image. We'll leave the action empty, but for the label we can use an image using the system image that is square.and.arrow.up, which is the SF symbol that Apple uses for the share link icon. Next up, I want to create a service class that we can use to manage the export and import of our package JSON and image that we'll be creating. So first, let's create a new Swift file and call it ShareService. And then I want to create a struct first though, that models our myImage entity that we can use to create our JSON object. I'm going to call this struct codable image and have it conform to both the codable and equitable protocols. I'm going to create 5 properties matching the same attributes for the core data entities, namely comment, which is a string, date taken, a date, ID, a string, name, string, and received from string. Next, we can create a class called ShareService that conforms to the observable object protocol. And we're going to need this eventually because we'll be injecting the class into the environment as an environment object, and I'm going to be observing a published property, and we'll do that later. So first the class. Inside there, I'm going to create a function called SaveMyImage that will accept one of these codable images. We'll create a file name property that will be a string, using the string interpolation to access the codable image's ID property, and then append JSON as the extension. Next, we'll try to encode it into data, so this requires a do-catch block. We can let the data be found by trying to use the JSON encoder to encode our codable image. Then, we can create a JSON string by using the string decoding the date, using string decoding the data as a UTF-8 self-type. And then if that fails, we can catch the error and simply print a message to the console. Well, now we need to be able to save our JSON. And this is a file manager responsibility. So we'll open the file manager extension. And first, let's just comment out this print in the receive image function. It returns nil if there isn't one anyway. I'm going to create a new function called SaveJSON that has two parameters. JSON, that is a string, and file name, that is also a string. The URL for the location where we want to save it will be the same location that our images are in, and that's the documents directory. And then we can append the file name as the last path component. We'll use a do-catch block now to try and write to that URL, where we can set atomically to false, but use UTF-8 encoding. Then if for some reason it fails, we can print that to the console. And this will help us debug during development. And if we've encoded okay, though, we should never see an error. Returning to ShareService now then, we can make the call to this function before the catch block in our function, passing in the JSON string and the file name as our two arguments. Let's go to our app entry point then, where the app main attribute is applied, and inject ShareService into the environment. And we can do that by first creating a state object with a var called ShareService that instantiates that new class. And then we can add it as an environment object in our MyImages grid view. Since it's now in the environment, all views can now have access to it. So open the ImageFormView. We can use the environment object property wrapper to create a ShareService of this type. And this will check the environment if a ShareService type object exists, and if it does, assign it to the ShareService variable. We'll need to stop the preview from complaining by attaching an environment object of this type to it with a ShareService instance. Now, I like to keep all of my environment objects and key values at the top of my view structs, so I'm going to move the other two environment objects up like this. Next, I'll need two state properties, one that will be used to trigger an alert and subsequently save the JSON. But first, the alert will have a text field, so we can enter our name as the received from name to be added to our JSON. So we'll need another state property called name that we can bind to an alert field. To trigger the action, then we can toggle the share in the share button action for our share button. To create the alert, we create an alert after the onChange function, and I want the overload that has a title key, is presented, actions, and message. For the title key, I'll use the string your name. is presented will be bound to that share property. The first action will be the text field using the string your name as a placeholder, and the text will be bound to the name state property. I'm going to have two buttons. The first will be a label of OK, and let's leave the action for now. And the second will be a label of cancel using the role cancel, and no action is going to be required here. For the message, we can use a text view with the string, please enter your name. So back to the OK button action then. First, we'll need to unwrap the optional viewModel ID property so we can use an if-let for that. Then, we can assign to the viewModel's received-from field our name value. If there's nothing in that field already, i.e. it's empty, we'll just assign that name. However, if the image is going to be passed around from user to user over across multiple devices, we'll want to be able to track where it originated and who else had it. So we'll use nil coalescing here to use the existing value and then append an arrow and then the name. Now we have everything we need to create a codable image. We simply assign the corresponding values from the viewModel to the properties of our codable image. Then we can call the new ShareService's SaveMyImage function, passing in that image. Let me fix this typo. And then finally here, after we finish encoding and saving the JSON, we want to dismiss the form. I want to cover one more thing in this video before I call it a day. In order to share data with other users and have your app know what kind of data it can accept and decode, we have to create a unique extension. And this is called a Universal Type Identifier. Well, we can register a unique UTI, or Universal Type Identifier, for our app by accessing the project's target and then the Info tab. Below the plist field, drop down the document types and click on the plus button to create a new entry. For the name, enter My Images data. For the types, this is a unique identifier for this type. So we'll use the bundle ID, which for me and you, unless you've changed it, for this app is com.createxsol.myimages. And then I'm going to append to it a unique string like my images data. And then I'm going to set the handler rank to owner. I'm creating it, I'm the owner. Below this, we'll create an exported type identifier. So as above, we'll drop down the disclosure triangle and click on the plus button to create a new entry. For the description, we'll use the same string that we used above for the name. We'll need to create a unique extension that will be unique for our app. So I'm going to use MYIMG, my image. And I'm going to create an uppercase version of this as well. So I'll need to put a comma first. The identifier here is the same as what we have in the types field above. And we have to make sure that it conforms to public.data. Now we want to have an icon associated with this file that we'll be sharing. And in the resources folder, you'll find an image that is a 40 by 40 size PNG called icon.doc.png. So drag this into your app bundle. Now, if I tap on the plus button for the icon here, I can see the image and select it. but nothing seems to happen, so I'm assuming that this is a bug in Xcode. So I'll have to add it manually. So open the new plist that has been created as a result of what we've just done above, and expand the exported type identifiers. For the icon file names, tap on the plus button to add a new entry, and then type in icon-doc.ping as the string value. We'll also need to add 2 additional properties to our default plist. Back in our target's info, tap on the plus button on the last row and search for and add supports opening documents in place. Leave the value as no. And for the second one, search for and add supports document browser, and leave it as no as well. Now return to your ShareService and create a new static property so that we'll not have to remember our extension. So we're going to call it ext, and it will be equal to our extension, the myimg. And then in the Save My Image function, we're going to change the extension from JSON to use this string interpolation to access the class's extension property. Let's run and make sure that you have at least 2 images on your simulator. Now, as you can see here, I have many from my previous version. So let me update the comment and date on one of my images and save. I'll open it again and share. The alert pops up and asks me to enter my name. So I'll enter my name and I'll tap OK. I'm going to open a second image and just share it without making any modifications. Of course, I'm going to have to enter my name again because that's who it's going to be received from on the receiving end. In the console, you can scroll down and locate the documents directory that's been printed out. So we can select the text and then right-click on it from the Services menu and choose Open. You don't see that on my screen, but I've covered this in a previous tutorial. So you'll check the Services menu and choose Open, and that'll bring up the dialog where you're prompted to run, and it will open that application's documents directory. You can see those 2 new myimg files here, and if we open one of them in TextEdit, we can see that it's a fully formed JSON object. So let's select now a second device in Xcode, and I'm going to choose the iPhone 13 Pro and build and run. I can see that there are no entries. So first, let's minimize Xcode so that I can see the existing documents directory from my iPhone 14 Pro. And if I drag one file into the running project, nothing appears to happen. Well, that makes sense because we haven't done anything. But go to the home screen and drag a second file onto the home screen. This time, our application opens up right away, so something must be working. That UTI must be recognized by our app. But where do the copies of these files go when they are dragged onto our screen? So let's maximize Xcode, and this time let's bring up the documents directory of that iPhone 13. So again, we'll right-click and then open that file. There are no images, and I don't see the files in the documents directory, but I do see an inbox folder that was created on the fly. And if I check that out, I see my 2 files are there. Well, let's delete them from here as we don't want them to be here for the next video. And I'm going to return to the documents directory of the iPhone 14 Pro that created these files. And I want to drag those 2 files that were saved there and save them somewhere for the next video. I'm just going to store mine in the resources folder. Well, that's it for today. In the next video, we'll see how we can decode the JSON to recreate the core data object, but you'll see that the image isn't going to be there yet. So in the next video, we'll also need to find a way to package it up with the image before creating our myImage file to send over. And of course, we'll need to unpackage and decode it on receipt. So make sure you subscribe to my channel to be notified when that next video is released. Thanks for watching.